Welcome to everybody to today's session, Shaping Urban Futures, a Global View. I'm very happy to have three panelists and three people from three different cities with me. They are renowned specialists on this issue. We will have Rick Burdett, Professor of Urban Studies at the London School of Economics. He wrote a lot of books. The last one, I think the most important one, you might correct me later on, is Shaping Urban Cities, where he talks about what makes cities a good city. He did a couple of his studies together with the German Herrhausen Foundation, and he will help us to kick off the session with a short overview of what is a good city in this world. Then we will have joining in Jean-Louis Missika. He was mayor from Paris, where he successfully helps to shape the city in a different way than we knew Paris. Paris today is a greener and a better place than it was 10 years ago. And this is thanks to Jean-Louis Missika and I suppose a couple of other people who helped you doing this. Last but not least, we are really very happy to have the mayor from Freetown, Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, who can tell a lot about that living in a good city is not just about living in Europe or living in the US, but that you can do amazing things also in poor countries. And we are really looking forward to hearing from you what you did to make your city a better place. Let's start with Mr. Burdett. So what makes a city a good city?
Well, I'm going to start by not answering your question because I think
okay.
The first thing,
I love that as a moderator.
I think the first thing is, why are cities important? And if I think of the audience, your international audience that you have in the ZEIT, that may not be obvious to everybody, in the sense that national politics, international politics, particularly at this moment in time, are seen as being, the overriding issues. But in the end, and the panelists you have here, the two active politicians, will confirm this. Cities are at the heart of actually good change, right? So in that sense, I will get to your question, because if you organize a city well, you can have a massive impact on equity, on social equity today. You can have a massive impact on the health and well-being of its citizens. And increasingly so, we're aware that cities can make a big difference to the environmental balance. But the relationship between the ability to do these things, to make a city good in your terms, depends on a number of things. And we'll hear this from Jean-Louis and from Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, which is how able is a mayor or the elected official, how able are they to actually deliver change? And that depends on two or three things. How much power the person has, how much money or resources they have, and who votes for them, and who will vote for them again to get back in power. And I think this is significant for the broader audience, which deals with corporations, deals with major national issues, to understand that actually the problems of everyday life are dealt with on the city on a daily basis. So what is a good city? I have a very spatial interpretation of that, and we'll hear more about it. But a good city is one that brings people together in a tolerant and decent way. That means a certain amount of closeness, or call it the compact city, call it the denser city, as opposed to the ever-sprawling Mexico cities or Los Angeles. Now, as Mayor Aki-Sawyerr knows more than anyone else on this panel, not all cities, and particularly in the fastest growing parts of the world like Africa, that is the case. The tendency is the opposite, is to just let things go, informal developments, 1 or 2 story buildings at best, and people spending hours commuting. So the good city is the opposite of that. The good city is where there is an efficiency of services, hospitals, schools, and everything else are close by to each other. Petra, we take that for granted in Europe, right? But it's also
I was just about to say, this is the typical European city that we use.
Yeah, but if we're having a serious global conversation like the Urban Age and the Alfred Herrhausen Gesellschaft have done for 20 years, I think one has to have this much broader international view. And most of the urbanization rapid urbanization is happening in Asia and Africa. So we can come back to that. But back to your point about, I guess, the good city. What is it that cities can do? One of them is certainly be planned in a more efficient way. Therefore, you have to have people in power who are enabled to do that. And again, we can't take that for granted. It will be interesting to hear from our colleagues. But I have found in the work that we've done of cities around the world that actually many cities, the people entrusted to actually run what's happening are neither in touch with the communities on the ground, nor are they favored by the people at national level because of issues of tax raising, political power, corruption, and much else. So I think if one takes the environmental issue on one side, the governance issue as the central, the third one must be equity. Cities are capable, absolutely capable, if well managed and if well run, and I obviously take now Paris as a model of this, and Jean-Louis will say more, you are actually able to make a city more rather than less democratic without separating out people who are different. The mechanism of the city that has worked for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, is to bring people of difference together. The refugee crisis has, of course, brought this into sharp focus, and managing that interface is fundamental. So the concept of the commons, which Jean-Louis has written about extensively and we'll talk about, I think is another sort of key idea. So environmental balance, good governance, and equity, I think, are at least some ingredients of making a good city. It's never going to be one size fits all. The way it might work in Singapore with a highly centralized state, very efficient, call it very top down, is going to be very different from what we might have heard from the mayor Peñalosa from Bogota, where there's a more protracted sort of a democratic process where people get elected and then kicked out if they're not liked. This is something that we have to take into account. There are many examples, but we'll hear more from our colleagues.
Thank you so much. To give us some guidance and some general principles. Mr. Missika, when I heard these principles, I remembered some proverb that says the devil is in the detail. So it's very good to have these ideas in your mind, but then to put them into practice is probably a very tricky issue in wherever you might be. So did you feel you had the power to do things? Mayors before you also had power. So what was the key ingredient that gave you the power to shift Paris in a different way, to make Paris, for example, a much greener place than it was before, a place where people now start to cycle?
Well, what you need is a strong leadership. And I think that Mayor Hidalgo had this strong leadership, and also the vision of a different city. You know, what is very difficult with cities, it's that it's difficult to imagine something different. When you see Paris, you see a very mineral city without a lot of green spaces. And you see also a city which is dedicated to the cars. The space for cars is becoming bigger and bigger since 1960 to 2000. And so when you decide, for example, to transform or to close a highway, like we have done it along the river, along the Seine, and say this highway will not be for cars, but it will be for pedestrians and bikers, people say it's impossible. You are going to kill the city. So it's a very, very difficult battle, because it's not only an ideological battle, but it's also a cultural one. Is the city, is a different city possible? This is the main question, you know. And I think that we win this battle during the last years, but it was very difficult. It was very difficult. We have been to court with people suing us about the closing of the highway. We had a lot of what we called in Paris Hidalgo bashing. people saying that she's crazy, she can't understand what is the real trends of economy, that cars are necessary for a good economy. And it's very difficult to shift from one model to the other model. But once you have find the good momentum, when you have find the good way to say we need to change, because the Paris Agreement, for example, on climate have been signed in Paris, and cities are on the front line for implementing the Paris Agreement. And if you want to implement the Paris Agreement, you need to diminish the part of cars in a city like Paris, and it's true for all the cities. So I think that you need to understand that it's not easy. You will receive a lot of shots, but if you don't move, you are in a very difficult position. So I think that all the cities are going in the same direction now, and it's good news.
So if I understand you correctly, when you start to change a city, first, what you will meet is a lot of resistance, and you have to kind of resist against people saying we can't change anything, you just have to do it, and then let the flow show them that it's better afterwards.
Because you know, I will not explain all the details, but when you close some parkings and some streets to cars, of course you have an increase of traffic jam, but you need this increase of traffic jam in order to diminish the room for cars, because the public space is limited. So if you want to increase the space for bikers and pedestrians, you need to diminish the space for cars. So it's logical, you know. So if you want to have bikers, you need bike lanes. And if you want to build bike lanes, you don't have the bikers immediately. You have to wait, because you need to have a real network. For example, now in Paris, we have 1,000 kilometers of bike lanes. And now you can see the difference, because now people can go from their home to their work safely all along the streets is taking. So
you argue that this is you probably argue that this is an advantage, and I would agree with you, but wouldn't you say this is just a question of mindset? In Germany, we still have a lot of cities where cars are the major way to get around. We have traffic jams elsewhere, and probably a lot of people argue this is the way we want the city to be. What's the argument to switch cities and to say a good city is a greener city, is a city with more bikes and less cars? Why?
Well, it's very easy to understand. You know, cars are the main factor of pollution in city, and so if you want to reduce pollution in a city, you need to reduce the numbers of cars and the traffic. And if you want to reach the goals of the climate agreement, you need to diminish the CO2 emission. So if you want to diminish the CO2 emission, you need to have less cars. And last argument is that the easiest way to move in a city is biking and public transportation. The car is one of the worst systems, because people are only one people in a car, and what we call in France autosolisme. I don't know, Vicky, if there is a translation. Is autosolism exist in English?
But, no, but we get it.
You get it.
We get it. Autosolism is a great word.
Yeah, it's a great word. And generally, it's not a woman, it's a man, and it's a man of 50, 60 years, and white man, of course. And so this point is essential. The good mobility system in a city is what we call mass mobility as a service.
I mean, I think, Jean-Louis, the key point you're making here, which I know the mayor of Freetown has built in any way, her sort of political vision on, is actually connecting this very technical thing called transport or you know, going around with a car, to issues of quality of life, right? And I think that what you two have done, and others, of course, have actually made that link. 20 years ago, you only had transport planners talking about transport. And most of them were probably trained at, English universities or something like that. And they always kept thinking in very narrow ways. What you did in Paris, and I know is happening in Freetown, is actually people, you've given them a choice. It might take you 5 minutes more, but your children are going to live longer. You're not going to get asthma and things like that. And just to remind you, in the London context, the city of London, which is the heart of the economic powerhouse, or anyway, before COVID, was around 92% of people take public transport to get to work. Yeah. So it's not a given that those at the top end of the scale, what you need to have, and this is the trade-off that Jean-Louis just talked about, is a fantastically effective public transport system, which is an alternative. And that's what Mayor Aki-Sawyerr is building in Freetown.
Exactly. Let's get her on board, Mayor. One of the arguments that we quite often hear is that in poor countries, you just can't afford a good public transport system. You can't afford more sustainability. You're trying to prove us all wrong. So what did you do? Could you, we can't hear you. Could you switch your...
She's muted.
Sorry, thanks,
Yeah,
Petra. I think it's not what did we do, but what are we doing? And let me just take a step back. And the description of poor country, developing country, emerging economy is one. Rick has made mention of urban sprawl. It's definitely a feature which you see very often because of a lack of planning, a lack of building control. And earlier on, the comment was made about how mayors can impact. And one of the responses, and I think this was Rick again at the beginning, is it has a lot to do with the power that the mayor has, as well as resources. So let's just stand back for a minute and just understand the dynamics of why it is in many of the most rapidly growing urban areas, what you see is a sprawl. Very often, and certainly in our case, there are multiple factors at play. But one which hasn't been mentioned at all because it's not really relevant to your context in the West is the rural-urban migration. And that is a concept where you actually have a rapidly growing population. So Jean-Louis talked about resistance from people suing because the motorway was closed because they feel they should be able to drive their car. That's a resistance of a nature. But when the resistance that you're dealing with is a sea of people moving into your city day by day and your population literally growing in front of your eyes, that planning question is just totally different. And you put that next to the question of resource and then the question of mandates. So Freetown is a city which was founded in 1893 as a municipality. So the city hall, the city council that I now lead, has been around since 1893. But after the civil war in Sierra Leone in the 1990s, ending in 2001, there was a whole new construct and a new act was put in place for the whole country, 2004. Since that time, the power to plan the city has been, well, actually from probably about 1972, the power to plan the city moved to central. And Petra, you said in your opening remarks, you made the point about the gap between the people who are making the decisions and those whose lives are affected by them. So that's where we are. The 2004 Act gives all the local councils the authority to plan. And yet in practice, that power still rests with the Ministry of Lands. So I hope this begins to give you a flavor of the environment into which we are talking about improving urban mobility, we're talking about improving housing, we're talking about all the things which are required to raise the standard of living in a city, things which can be done and should be done. So how are we going about it?
Could you give us a concrete example? Because I suppose most of our listeners, they have never been to Freetown. So how was it, and what is the most important thing for you to change, and what did you already change?
Okay.
What do you do to make your city a better city?
I think what I can give you, because Germany, you have quite a lot of small cities, you have some very big ones, but just to give you a sort of sense of the size of Freetown, it's 1.2 million people. And the population increased 2.5 times in 25 years. And as a consequence, because of this planning hiatus that I mentioned, we ended up with 74 informal settlements. So this is a city where the geography, it's a very small city. We represent almost 20% of the population of the country, but less than 1% of the land size. And we are surrounded by it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
So we should all come.
Just seeing your expression there, it's still a beautiful city, but it will be so much more beautiful when we're done with Transform Freetown, which is our plan. So you've got the ocean, you've got the plain, and then you've got the mountains. And what we've had over the last 25 years, accelerated in the last 10, is these informal settlements springing up on the mountains, resulting in the forests being destroyed. What are we doing? We've started on a journey called Transform Freetown, #Transform Freetown. 4 clusters: resilience, human development, healthy city, and urban mobility. And that's to the point that my colleagues have made. When you're talking about developing a city, you're just talking about developing every aspect of the lives of the residents of that city. Urban mobility. We've heard a bit about transport. There was never public transport in Freetown, no mass transit. Of course, there's public transport, but it's all low occupancy. Okadas, which is the motorbikes, or tuk-tuks, which we call kekas, and very, very old vehicles. So carbon emission has been terrible. And what we're working on now with Transform Freetown is introducing a cable car, which will reduce our emissions by 30%, as well as reducing travel time from one end of the city to another from about 2.5 hours to under 30 minutes. So that will increase economic productivity. It will also enable us to have land value capture in the areas where the stations are, and it will ensure the communities which were previously inaccessible will be accessed. And on the same point about climate change and the destruction of the forest, we are in the process of implementing Freetown the Tree Town, the planting of 1 million trees. And we've literally got 500,000 trees going into the ground, but between now and the end of October. So this is speaking to quality of life. It's speaking to better air quality. It's speaking to better water management, because this is protecting water catchments. And of course, we've still got this question of housing, which is really, really fundamental. And I listen to colleagues talking about, moving from gray housing to green housing. We just simply need housing. So these are things where there's some opportunity, but definitely there's a lot of challenge brought by the pace at which the things which are working against a planned city are the speed at which they're moving vis-a-vis the speed at which we have to move, both in terms of getting access to mandates, getting access to resources, and really bringing the people along with us.
I think, just hearing what
Mr. Burdett, let me just ask you a question that kind of refers to what we just heard. You said in the beginning, when you kind of helped us to surround the topic, that lots of people will be living in big cities. In Germany, we are a country that we have a lot of mid-sized cities. But your argument is that this is the exception. The rule is that cities will be bigger and bigger, so that we will face these kind of problems, that we don't have enough transport, that the air quality is not good, that there will be million and million people living in cities where we have actually the same problem. Is that true? Or
no, I think I think it's WTO who's come up with that study, but it's now estimated that by 2050, 75% of the world's population will be living in cities. But a lot of that city growth is going to be in emerging economies. It's going to be in Africa. It's going to be in Asia. And it's going to be driven not by this rural urban migration as well, which is also again linked to climate change. Now, from the perspective of cities in Germany, I doubt very much that those dynamics are going to change terribly. But what we all need to do, because as someone said in a New York Climate Week is on this week, And I was just on that a little while ago, and someone made the point that carbon is actually like the climate. I mean, once it's going in the wrong direction, once it's released, you can't get it back. And this is, I think, the point is not so much that how your cities are going to be affected in the same way that ours are, but how, as a world economy, we're all going to be impacted, as we've seen with COVID, by leaving anyone behind, by not actually addressing these problems in one part of the world. There are knock-on effects.
Mr. Burdett?
No, all I want to say, and really looking at Jean-Louis to take this up, is that what the mayor of Freetown what she said is not obvious to everyone. That actually, again, linking the idea of a cable car, planting trees, providing housing in the right place is all about making a more equitable city, let alone an environmentally decent one. This is important and new, right? And I know that Jean-Louis in Paris with Mayor Hidalgo made something equally brave. It's a different scenario, of course, Mayor. It's not the same economic condition at all. But Paris, as Jean-Louis will explain, has a serious division between the center and the periphery. So a number of their initiatives are certainly green, certainly well designed, but also about dealing with trying to resolve this incredible inequality at the fringe of one of the world's greatest cities. But Jean-Louis.
Well, I agree. I think that social mixity is the key of a good city, of a better city. If you have some discrimination between social level of people, you have a city with big problems. And what we see now in the United States is an example of the impact of urban discrimination on the relationship between inhabitants of a city. And in Paris, we have decided not only to build social housing, but to build it in the richer neighborhood of the city. The city of Paris, is divided between East and West. I think that a lot of cities are divided like this, and in the East, you have the social housing, and in the West, you have the rich people living in bigger apartments and maybe sometimes nicer places. So we have decided to fight this division and to try to have both social mixity and functional mixity. Functional mixity is what we call the 15-minute city. You have different kind of vision of cities. And for example, Le Corbusier had in mind a very functional city where the business quarter was totally devoted to business, and housing is in another place, and cultural centers and shops are in another place. So functional mixity, the city of the 15-minute city, is a completely different way of thinking the city. The idea is very easy to understand. It means that everybody needs to have some very basic services near where they live, near their homes. Less than 15 minutes by foot or by bike, you can find a school, a movie theater, a medical doctor, and things like that, and even, of course, a green space. So if you want to build this kind of city, you need to have a lot of power in controlling the land and the use of the land. Because
I think this is a very important point when you argue that you need to have not just power, but you also need to have land. I was just wondering whether you're not just creating an illusion of a city where equality is more of an issue, because Paris, in my mind, is not a city of very big equality. I know the poorest part of the city, I know the rich ones. In London, the same. In Berlin, I could tell you, and I probably would say in Freetown, it's the same. Do mayors have the power to really change this?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Jean-Louis, sorry for cutting in. I just wanted to say that it's about political will and deliberate action. What Jean-Louis just described is, he's used the word, we made a decision. That's the expression he's used. We've made a decision to build this social housing in the west side of the city, in the richer side of the city. In the same way in Freetown, it's a different scale, but when you're talking about inequality, you can have massive inequality even in areas, even in countries that are poorer. And you want to, as mayors, to try and close that gap. So with us, when we talk about we're doing slum upgrading, we've chosen communities in the east. Even with a cable car, we've got 3 lines. We're starting with the first line in the east. And when it comes as well to green spaces, we've begun to create green spaces in the city. And we're really committed to ensuring, because we know that green spaces can improve the quality of life for the people around whom it's provided, or for whom it's provided. So again, we're investing in the East. And it is interesting, this East-West, London, Paris, even Freetown.
It's a wind.
Oh, the East has 2/3 of the city's population, and it is definitely far more deprived. But what mayors need to do, to the point that Rick made before, these questions of inequality are not things that get addressed by chance. They only get addressed by determination. So it's our job and our responsibility to ensure that we're factoring these into our decision making. We're taking into consideration what it is that we're doing, whether it's housing, whether it's green infrastructure, whether it's transport, whether it's health. And the other thing, of course, Petra, is recognizing that nothing sits in a silo. When you are talking about city development, urban development, you really have to be looking at the whole of life experience for those who live in your city.
But when we started to prepare this this little talk, you mentioned one word, which is the commons, which I don't think is in Germany. We know, we kind of feel what it is, but we don't have it as a political concept. But if I get you right, this is what cities need. They need like a common space. It's important not to privatize everything, but to have between state and private sector something that we have in common. And this is what mayors then can shape and use to make the city a better city. Did I get you right? Would you say this is some of the key ingredients when you come to space?
Maybe I can say a word on it, because I wrote a paper on the big book of Ricky on this subject called Urban Commons. The concept we use generally are the concept of public space and private space. And what is important with this concept of commons or common goods is that it goes forward of this separation between public and private. Because a building, a house building or an office building has also some commons, and the building is not something which is outside of the city, it's part of the city. And when you build a building, you need to have a relationship between the private space and the public space. And you need to find how this new building, for example, has to function to be made in relation with the rest of the city. So this concept of common is very important to understand, not only how a city works. For example, the river, when you have a river, it's a common, it's an urban common. The air you breathe is part of the commons. It's not a public good, it's a common. And of course, the main question is about governing the commons. Who is governing the commons? And what is important is that in this concept, the governance of the commons is not only a public one or a private one. You need to have all the people, all the stakeholders around the table. For example, when I was in charge, I organized a seminar on the river, about the river, La Seine, in order to make big decision on the future of the river. Mm-hmm. And I tried to put all the stakeholders around the table, because when you have all the stakeholders around the table, you can find solutions. Because a river, for example, you have people who want to walk around, but you have also people who are working with the river, for example, delivering goods.
Or traffic on the river.
Yeah, the traffic on the river. So if you are not able to put all the people around the table and create a governance body which works, you cannot find good solutions. And one of the big...
What was the solution for the Seine? Just give us to kind of help us with the example a bit further. What was the solution for...
Well, I will give you a very, very specific point. You know, you have people who are making industrial working on the Seine. And these people are making the walking along the river impossible, because they block the part of the quay during the day. So we organize a negotiation in order to have a path for the bikers and the pedestrians along the factory, in order to have a continuity of the walking along the Seine. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of things, you say devil is in the details, and you're right. This kind of very different way of thinking is because the part they are exploiting is a private one. So we need to transform a very small part of a private property into a public property in order to organize this working continuity. So this is a kind of example, but another example is creating public transportation on the river, and the conflict between tourist transportation and Parisian transportation. So how do you share the river in order to have also a public transportation, not only a tourist transportation on the river? So you have a lot of questions like that, which are very, very specific and very interesting. And this is why you need to think of the common good as a common, and not as a public good or a private good.
Mr. Burdett, this sounds as if the key solution is participation, to get the people on board. But if I got you right at the beginning, you said power is also an issue. Sometimes the administration just needs to do things and then let the people see how it goes. And afterwards they will be happy with, for example, a city free of cars. So how does this get together? The idea of getting people on board to have them participate in the decision, and at the same time you need to do things, otherwise they won't be done.
Well, I mean, you're asking me, Petra?
Yeah.
Since I'm not an elected official, I can say this. I think you need someone who has the courage to develop a vision within a democratic process, set that vision out, stand by it, and you either get kicked out after 4 or 5 years or you don't. And let me give you one small example. The first directly elected mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, for whom I worked together with the architect Richard Rogers, was took the bold decision to introduce congestion charging, that you had to pay, still today, quite a lot of money to go into the center of the city. Mm-hmm. He asked for all the engineers to do a study. He asked for the political advisors to do a study, and they all said, "You're crazy. Don't even think of doing it. You'll end up like the French. You'll be arrested. People will be protesting and everything else." And what Ken Livingstone did, to his enormous credit, he said, "I want to do it. I'm going to do it. And if the people don't like it, they'll vote me out." What happened is that he got reelected with a vast majority. And, you know, that's one of the legacies, a good legacy that he's left behind. So in that sense, I strongly believe I'm not calling it a top-down. Mayor from Freetown will tell us, I mean, you have to interpret what people feel. You are the person who's been elected to articulate that vision. So Petra, it's not a question of just participation, it's also participation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a two-way process. And otherwise you end up something which we all know, which is NIMBYism, not in my backyard. I don't want, if I'm a Westerner, a Western resident of Paris, social housing in my backyard. I don't want a noisy environmental turbine in my backyard. I don't want a hospital, and so it goes on. But cities are about sharing also this responsibility. And I think that's what these practical issues that even you were talking about the river, negotiating difference is also about establishing trade-offs. Mm-hmm. Okay, one tough thing, but then something else. And I think in Freetown, that's what you're doing. It's happening now, right?
Mayor, would you like to add something?
You're muted.
You're muted again.
Sorry, just listening to Jean-Louis about the river, I was smiling because, in our case, it's not just the rivers. It's the rivers where people are trying to build housing in the rivers on every single piece of land. So I mentioned before this pressure, this enormous pressure, and it is about participation. So we've identified a number of informal settlements, what people would describe as slum communities, and we're talking to them. We're engaging them. We're saying, you can't stay here, but it's not good enough. It's the balance, right? It's not even the balance. It's doing it right. Because it's one thing, and there've been so many examples in other parts of the world, not examples that you'd be familiar with in the West, but in other parts of the developing world, where there've been these actions to close down slums, remove slums, and they don't succeed because there's so many drivers, and you need to get to the underlying causes, and you need to work with the people. And I think this is where the participation comes in. So we are partnering with the Slum Dwellers Association, and we're working out a plan. We're mapping out and creating, in a participatory way, alternative living. Some of it resulting in densification, some of it actually moving people out of the city, but we're not trying to do it overnight. We're taking our time and making sure it's done properly with architects and engineers, and most importantly, with the participation of the people. But just taking another example on this business of making a decision. When it comes to something like urban mobility, one of the challenges we have in our city is the number of people who are street trading. It actually creates traffic jams because they're using the sidewalks as the market. And one of the accusations which is levied at me as a mayor is, you don't want to move them. And this is by the ones who are not in my backyard. You don't want to move them because you want them to vote for you. And I turn around and I say, actually, I don't want to move them until I've built the markets, because there are no markets. So we've just signed for the construction of 4 markets last week, raising the money from a private investor. I definitely stand by what Ricky says, what Ken's example was. I'm not here to be here in perpetuity. I'm here to make a difference. If making a difference means I don't get voted in the next time, that's okay.
Don't make you president.
You better not say that. We just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and we're doing it in a way which isn't just about bravado and making statements, but actually in a considered manner. So to the example of Jean-Louis again, you bring the players together. There has to be some give and take. When I was campaigning on the platform of Transform Freetown, at that time I said, for we community, for progress, for Freetown, if you are going to have transformational change, there's going to be give and take. Some people are going to feel at a point in time that they're the losers, because transformational change doesn't happen without a shift. And when there's a shift, somebody's going to be displaced. The point is to ensure that for the greater good and to get people to move along with you. But yeah, I think we're determined to get this right. We won't always get it right, but we're seeking to ensure that those commons are really used for the benefit of all and for the city as a whole.
We are almost coming to the end of this very short session, far too short session, but I don't want to miss one topic out. When we talk about future cities, we very often talk about sustainabilities and sustainable cities. So does something like this exist? Will something like this ever exist, a city that's really sustainable? I think in the last century, cities quite often were like these monsters sucking out whatever is in the surroundings, sucking out the life of the forests and the rivers. The sustainable city, is it just a dream, or do you see any city being there soon? A kind of body that is not exploiting nature, but is in the end maybe even good for nature?
Well, I think that cities are sustainable by design, because cities are living sometimes longer than nation states and other things like that, powers, national powers or international powers. Empires disappear and the cities remain. And Paris has a long history, and Berlin has a long history, and London also has a long history. And the history of these cities is the way they are dealing with problems, issues, difficulties. For example, COVID-19 is a new challenge for cities, because physical distanciation is entering in a position with one of the major quality of a good city, which is density. And for example, for Paris, the coronavirus is a nightmare, because the economy of the city is based on promiscuity. The bars are overcrowded. The restaurants are overcrowded. The theaters, the opera, the gym places, and the swimming pools. Everything in Paris is overcrowded because it's one of the danciest city in the world, and all these businesses are jeopardized by the coronavirus. And we need to find solutions. And I think that the cities are always in a situation of dealing with new problems. And the motto of the city of Paris is "Fluctuat nec mergitur," which means she is invited by floats, but can resist to the floats. And I think it's the best definition of what is resilience. And I think that all the big cities are resilient. And a lot of times people announce the death of the global cities, of the big cities. And I don't know if you have seen that. There is a very interesting paper on the death of New York in the New Yorker. I don't think at all that New York will disappear. And I don't think that Paris will disappear, because these cities have shown thanks to the smartness of their population and to the boldness of their mayors, they have shown that they are able to resist and to find solutions. And we need to find solutions against COVID-19. We don't have yet. But we need
Petra, I think behind your question of can a city be sustainable, I think you also were nearly referring to the food and energy it takes. And I saw a fantastic exhibition organized, in fact, in Jean-Louis' outfit in the Pavillon de l'Arsenal.
Yeah.
It showed that Paris, and you will give me the statistics, Jean-Louis, was nearly self-sufficient, no? Was a very high percentage of food was produced in the wider metropolitan area. What was the percentage at its height?
It was 75%, and it was in before the Second World War.
Yeah. So not that far ago. We weren't all farmers and had animals. It was already one of
and in 1960.
I think, just to add to Jean-Louis' point, if we retrofit our cities with even food growing capacity, but also energy making, generating capacity, that then cities actually can be more sustainable. It also depends where do you draw the boundary, because for example, Milan, if you draw a boundary around Lombardy, is something like 90% of its food resource comes from that wider, very fertile region. So I think it's a really interesting issue. And of course, the COVID question puts them into even sharper focus.
On sustainability for a city like Freetown, so one of the things that we're doing additionally is a regeneration plan for the Central Business District. And you know, the point that Rick just made about retrofit, this is also an opportunity for us to take something which has evolved very badly and try to improve on it through planning so that that sustainability is built in. And COVID has actually shone the light on the need for food security. So as a city, we're embarking on an urban farming project where we're planting, where we're working with communities. Some of those, in fact, we're targeting the informal settlement communities with an urban farming project where 500 families, we'll start off with that pilot, will be supported to ensure that they can grow their own food. And this was coming off the back of the lockdowns and trying to ensure that there was a buffer. We never actually in Freetown went to those long lockdowns that other countries saw. We couldn't have done it because people don't have the resources to keep it going. But it did trigger this plan for us to build on urban farming in the city, which speaks to sustainability. And of course, with planting 1 million trees in and around the city, that really does also, and you're going to have economic crops, you're going to have fruit trees, but very importantly, it's water security because it's protecting water catchments. And we also have a plan on improving our waterways. So to your point, can cities be sustainable? I think the short answer is yes. There is a resilience that cities have. And even our own little city here is going to be 230 years old very soon. So cities have survived. Cities have survived for centuries. But we, I think in this day and age, have the opportunity, particularly with the existential threats of climate and the sort of pandemics we're seeing, to not just hope for the best, but actually to plan for the best.
Thank you so much, Mr. Burdett. As you are the ultimate expert on this issue, is there anything awfully important that we missed in this talk? I know that we could go on for ages because there's so many interesting aspects still to talk about, but is there something that we're really missing?
Well, I think we should just end with a reminder that we're talking about 2.5 billion more people moving to cities in the next 30 years, right? And the mayor of Freetown has mentioned that, and the regions of the world where most of this urbanization is happening are parts of the world that can actually do something about it if they follow the right path. And therefore, learning from cities what to do, and much more importantly, what not to do, is, I think, part of the game. And that's why I think even, a conference like this one, that we're talking to, not just urban specialists, but people who are making decisions in different walks of life, putting cities on that agenda is incredibly important. I think there are lessons to be learned from what we've heard today.
I thank you so much for your input. My mother once used to say all politics is local. I know that she wasn't the one to invent this sentence, but she was the one I first heard of it because she worked on a city council, and she taught me that it's awfully important what's happening in a city because it's really close to people's heart and to people's mind. Sometimes it's much closer than national politics. And I think there's a lot of people underestimate what good mayors are doing. So let me thank you very much for your input. Maybe it helped to push some people a bit closer to their city council and to look at what's going on there. I thank you very much for your great input, and have a great day in Freetown, in London, and in Paris. I hope you will continue doing what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.